Conservative members of Parliament are convening for what could either be the end of the road for Theresa May or a chance to crush dissent within the ranks.
It will now be a vote of confidence in my leadership of the Conservative Party. I will contest that vote with everything I've got.
The UK Prime Minister at the outset of a day that's seen her scrap a trip to Dublin so she could lobby for lawmakers' support ahead of that confidence vote within the Conservatives. On paper, May pretty much assured of staring down the challenge from hard Brexiters. For them, the last straw was with 24 hours' notice. The pulling of Tuesday's vote on the divorce deal concluded with the EU. Before we cross to our panel in the France 24 debate, we're just going to cross over and listen to the French Prime Minister speaking live about the Tuesday night attack in Strasbourg.
Nous voulons faire en sorte que cet individu soit interpellé, traduit devant la justice dans les meilleures conditions et dans les meilleurs délais.
And as quickly as possible. In order to ensure the security of French citizens, the President of the Republic has decided to increase the mobilization of the military as part of the Sentinelle operation. 500 military will be complementing the law enforcement organizations, and 1,300 soldiers will be mobilized in the next few days. This will enhance the security of public spaces, notably Christmas markets, which exist all over France in this pre-Christmas period. The government is determined, very clearly determined, and at the same time very calm, without any doubt. All those who commit terrible acts will be brought to justice, as the individual who perpetrated the crime in Strasbourg.
All right, the French Prime Minister there announcing in the wake of the Strasbourg attack, beefed up security, first in the manhunt, of course, but also to protect Christmas markets, not just the one in Strasbourg, but across France. We'll have more with Laura Cellier in our upcoming editions. Time now again for the France 24 debate, and we were mentioning it, the UK Prime Minister Theresa May facing a leadership challenge from hard Brexiters within her own Conservative Party. For them, the last straw was that with 24 hours notice, there was the pulling of Tuesday's vote on the divorce deal concluded with the EU. May still has the support of Tory Remainers, like the veteran Kenneth Clarke, but there are reports that they too will desert the PM if she leaves the so-called meaningful vote on Brexit until after Christmas. So when will that vote take place? What does happen next? And what about the other 27 members of the EU? Do they just sit and watch it all like a British drama series? We're on the eve of a European summit where leaders say they just want to move on to other matters. It's already been 18 months, and one can only wonder when the final curtain really will come down. Today in the France 24 debate, will May stare down the challenge? And with us is our Europe editor, Catherine Nicholson.
Hello.
Are your bags packed? You're off to Brussels for that summit.
I'm off to Brussels for that summit tomorrow. Yeah.
Okay. From the European Parliament in Strasbourg, a Labour member of the European Parliament, Mary Honeyball. Thank you for being with us.
Hello. Pleased to be here.
It's always a pleasure to check in with Cambridge historian Robert Tombs, who was with us the day after the Brexit vote in London. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Now, just to be clear, there are 315 Conservative members of Parliament. According to the Reuters news agency, Theresa May's got the firm pledges of support from the 158 needed on paper to stare down a leadership challenge. That vote taking place between now and 8 p.m. local time, 9 p.m. if you're here on the continent. Reuters puts the number of those supporting May higher at least 185. But let me ask you, Robert Tombs. We cannot go to Robert Tombs yet. We'll try to cross over now. How many votes? I'll begin with you then, Catherine. How many votes does Theresa May need to ensure her legitimacy? We know she's going to win the vote.
We assume she's going to win the vote.
Well, William Hill, the betting agency, has stopped taking wagers because they're convinced she's gonna have the needed votes. But that's not enough to ensure that she still has her legitimacy to govern.
That's a very good point. The figure that I've seen going around for Theresa May to avoid something that's truly humiliating is for that vote to be fewer than 100. Definitely. But as we know, there's 317 Conservative MPs in total. That would still be a third of them.
A third of them. Robert Toombs, how many dissenters can Theresa May afford?
I've no idea, but I'm not a Tory member. I'm not a member of the Tory party, but I do think that Theresa May really ought to resign for the good of the country, for the good of her own party, for the good of the future of the whole Brexit negotiation. She's done her best, and her best has simply not succeeded. So whatever happens tonight, she has no policy that is acceptable to Parliament or to the country. And I think she really needs to get out of the way and let someone else take over.
March 29th, 2019, that's the date that Britain is due to leave the European Union. If your wish was granted, Robert, how would it work? What would happen next?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure what would happen is that whoever Mrs. May's successor is would go to the EU and say the withdrawal agreement is not acceptable to Parliament or to the country. No country would accept such an arrangement, which makes it, in effect, a subordinate, a vassal to the EU, and that we have to come up with something really quickly to stop this from breaking down. If the EU is unwilling to change or in any way, which is, of course is what they say, they always say that, but they often don't do that, then we have to prepare for an exit from the EU under WTO rules next March, or if there's some extension, a little later.
All right, so you're seeming to hint that perhaps...
Could I say that this has been presented...
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say this has been presented by opponents of Brexit as a terrible catastrophe going over a cliff and so on. There's no good evidence that this is true. We know that lots of preparations have already been made, both in Britain and on the continent, not least in France, to make sure that trade and traffic continue to move. And so people who are saying this is going to cause a great economic catastrophe are either deluding themselves or are deluding the country.
Mary Honeyball, you agree?
No, I don't agree with that at all. The government's own figures, the report commissioned by the Attorney General, wasn't presented in full to Parliament, and when it was shown that Theresa May and her government had actually been in contempt of Parliament for not publishing that. And I've seen several, not just one, but several economic surveys and research which actually shows that our economy would shrink, and shrink quite dramatically if we were to have a cliff-edge Brexit. I mean, it is clearly just not in our economic interests. We've seen inflation go up. We've actually seen food shortages over the last 18 months or so. It would be disastrous. Kent County Council, the county most affected were we to have a very hard Brexit, has actually said that the roads would jam up and nothing would be able to get round Kent. It's clearly ridiculous and it has to be avoided at all costs. I also think that Theresa May will get enough votes to stay, and the thing about her leaving, her resigning, is actually her authority is so undermined anyway, it won't make much difference whether she wins by 5 votes, 50 or 100.
Because the latest
she is damaged anyway. That's the point. What I think she should do, and this is the time she could do it, not hurtle along to the abyss, but actually say, what we can do now is have a people's vote, have another vote on what is happening now, and go back to the people, ask the people to decide. That's what she should do.
Go back with a second referendum. Robert Toombs, what would you be in favor of a second referendum?
Could I just say I wouldn't be afraid of one. I think the Leave side would win it. But it would cause huge damage. It would cause a great deal of division in the country, which is already quite divided. It would cause a long period of uncertainty. And I think it's a really pretty crazy idea. And could I say that these scare stories about the economy are not supported by the facts? Our economy at the moment is doing better than any of the main European economies. We have a record level of employment, wages are rising, investment is increasing. These stories really have to be scotched and shown for what they are, which is propaganda.
It's not propaganda. I mean, I have actually seen very reputable economic forecasts, and indeed the Bank of England itself has said that the economy is going to get worse. It will shrink our economy, and it would be bad for the economy. I know in the referendum campaign in 2016, there was a lot of anti-views about Mark Carney. Mark Carney is the governor of the Bank of England, and the Bank of England, we have to say, and we have to believe, and we know, the Bank of England knows what it's doing, and its forecasts are right.
All right. The issue that brought this vote within the Conservative Party to a head was the fact that you had this divorce deal vote. It was planned for Tuesday. We'd all marked on our calendars in red, and then it was polled. The last possible time it can happen, says the Prime Minister, is late January, and there was mayhem in the Commons, if you'll pardon the pun, when the Prime Minister pulled the divorce deal. The Leader of the Opposition earlier in the day pressing the PM on when that, quote, meaningful vote will in fact happen.
Can she now confirm that we will have the concluding days of debate and votes within the next 7 days before the House rises for the Christmas recess?
We've had a meaningful vote. We had it in the referendum on 2016. And if he wants a meaningful date, I'll give him one. 29th of March 2019, when we leave the European Union.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Totally and absolutely unacceptable to this House in any way. This House agreed a programme motion. This House agreed the 5 days of debate. This House agreed when the vote was going to take place. The government tried to unilaterally pull that and deny this House the chance of a vote on this crucial matter. The Prime Minister and her government have already been found to be in contempt of Parliament. Her behaviour today is just contemptuous of this Parliament and of this process.
All right, you see Theresa May shaking her head. Jeremy Corbyn saying she's contemptuous. She did artfully dodge the question of when that meaningful vote will in fact take place during Prime Minister's questions time. And really what we're seeing, Catherine Nicholson, is this battle between the executive and the legislative branch in one of the world's oldest parliamentary democracies.
Yeah, that's quite right. And I think it's important to underline for our viewers who might not be au fait with British politics and constitution that Britain doesn't have a written constitution. So we do have this rather interesting constitutional situation compared to, say, Germany or France, where it's all written down on paper.
Is this a crisis? Is this a constitutional crisis or not?
Oh, that's a good question. Perhaps for someone who's more of a political analyst than I am. But I think we can say that at this point it's not a constitutional crisis. We have had confidence votes in prime ministers before. Some have survived, some have lost them. But it's certainly a political chaos at the very least, I would say.
Political chaos.
That's how it's seen from Europe, certainly.
And why we knew, because this is what we'd been told, right? Yes, she's going to lose the vote, but then she'll either the markets will weigh in or something will happen, and that will move the story along. Is there any chance of that vote happening before Christmas? It doesn't sound like it from what she said.
Well, I think it's very interesting that Theresa May herself, when she was asked the question initially, did say that she believed that the vote had to happen by January 21st at the latest. So I think that indicates that there's even uncertainty for the Prime Minister and her own team. Perhaps they've been looking into that more closely since then. But yes, I mean, these things do take time, don't they? This was a 5-day debate that was interrupted at the start of day 4 of those 5 days. Would those 2 final days have to be put back on the calendar? The vote itself would have to happen. As you said, there's meant to be a Christmas recess in the British Parliament. Are they going to cancel Christmas, or would this be pushed back until January?
Robert Toombs, doesn't sound like they're cancelling Christmas, but they did postpone the vote. What was your reaction when you heard that it had been pulled?
Cromwell cancelled Christmas. It wasn't very popular. What did I think? I thought it was an incredible humiliation for the government. It was a pretty disgraceful treatment of Parliament. It's the sort of thing that would normally, in the past at least, have caused governments to resign and to call general elections. But we can't do that under the relatively new Fixed-Term Parliament Act. So we're kind of stuck with trying to muddle along as we are. I think the chance of avoiding, or at least of ending the crisis, at least for the time being, is if Mrs. May got really solid and legally binding assurances from the EU that the withdrawal period would be time limited. At the moment, the withdrawal agreement is not really time limited. We can only leave it if the EU agrees. So, I mean, Mrs. May would have to get the EU to say, OK, after 2 years, you can leave. At the moment, we're signing up to something which is indefinite. And that's what most people in Parliament and in the country are very, very alarmed about.
All right, we're into the first half hour of 2 hours of voting right now. Among Conservatives in the House of Commons, a leadership challenge against Theresa May. We're going to get back to that story in a moment. Just remind you of the other big story we're following for you here on France 24, the manhunt on both sides of the Franco-German border for the 29-year-old ex-convict accused in the Strasbourg Christmas market shooting. French authorities banning demonstrations around the city and looking into his ties to radical networks. Earlier, the mayor of Strasbourg said he hoped that he would be able to reopen the Christmas market as early as Thursday.
It is an act of terrorism. Even though it might not have been claimed by a terrorist group, it is still an attempt to destabilize our society and way of life. So we must take a day to grieve for the victims. But as soon as possible, we must get back to normal, return to our day-to-day, because destabilization is the aim of those who committed these acts.
Un objectif, c'est de nous déstabiliser.
Yeah, the suspect still at large, with the manhunt extended to both sides of the Franco-German border. He had done jail time in France and in Germany. Strasbourg, where the European Parliament is in session, where a Christmas market is on. Strasbourg, which is in shock.
The bells toll from Strasbourg's Notre Dame Cathedral as residents gather to pay their respects, leaving tributes in the streets.
In the face of this barbarity, we must all remain united in solidarity and say no. We must not be afraid.
A reception centre is in place to give psychological support as the marks of Tuesday's attack linger across a city in shock.
It's all the more shocking because just an hour before the attack, I was at the Grand Rue. I walk there to go home every evening, so we feel like we were spared. Our thoughts are with those who were injured or killed.
The Christmas market is a great symbol of the city of Strasbourg and our culture. They ruined our Christmas.
Strasbourg's mayor announced a day of mourning, but said life must go back to normal on Thursday.
Tomorrow we will open the Christmas market again, if the security situation allows it. We will open our schools again and we will go on.
Flags were at half-mast at the European Parliament, resuming their duties after an overnight lockdown. MEPs held a minute of silence for the victims.
Yeah, and before we get back to the France 24 debate, I want to ask you, Mary Honeyball, you're in Strasbourg where that lockdown has been happening. What's been the reaction among colleagues?
Oh, it's all terrible. I mean, everyone is just shocked and upset, grieving. It's not something that we expect, and it's been absolutely terrible. I actually wasn't in the Parliament when the incident took place. I was actually in the middle of Strasbourg. And it was a huge shock when we found out, and you know, we didn't know what to do, and we thought this is just terrible. We were told to stay where we were and lock all the doors and wait, which is what we did. I mean, it's absolutely dreadful. These incidents are appalling, and I hope they catch the person who did it very soon.
You know Strasbourg, because the Parliament sits there 1 week a month.
Yeah.
How do you feel that how the locals handled it, in your view?
They've done as well as they can. Obviously, the Christmas market is a very busy time, and the police were there doing security checks, which has happened over the last few years. So I think they did what they can, and they could. And there were lots of police cars, and they were mobilised very quickly. I think it's unfortunate that the gunman, the perpetrator, escaped. Which you wouldn't necessarily expect it to happen. And I don't think any of us know the full details of how that happened. But I think they were prepared, and I think the security was as good as it could have been.
All right, let's get back to the matter at hand here. What with that leadership contest taking place as we speak in the House of Commons within the Conservative Party, outside of Parliament. France 24 correspondent Bénédicte Paviot, what's the latest where you are?
Well, we're 35 minutes into this no confidence vote. The Prime Minister has made her appeal to her fellow Conservative MPs. 48 of them, she knows, don't want her to lead the party anymore, don't want her to be the Prime Minister of this country anymore. But over 165 of them have publicly said to the media and on social media and elsewhere today that they will support the Prime Minister. What she needs is 158 of them. So once it comes to the secret ballot, will they do what they publicly said they would? What's, I think, extremely relevant, pertinent even, is that Prime Minister's aides and 10 Downing Street were heavily briefing in the hours leading up to her starting this appeal to her party behind closed doors, that what the no confidence vote is about tonight, it's not, they said, about who leads the Conservative Party into the next planned general election. It's about whether to change Prime Minister now. And I think that is highly relevant, because that's saying, look, as she said this morning when she came out of number 10 to the media, I'm going to give it everything I've got. So she's saying, I'm not going to go on and on, although I gather from leaks inside the room, she repeated that to them, but she did not give them a date when she will leave. And I think it's a signal to people who would like her job, let me get on with Brexit, let me do that, and then I will go. But as yet, an unspecified date from this Prime Minister and this leader, still as we speak, of the Conservative Party.
Yeah, and there's been a speculation, but who really wants the job at this particular point in time?
Well, that speculation has gone on really from day one. And let's remember that Theresa May, in the end, it was a coronation. It wasn't put to the party members. The party, in a sense, there were other candidates. And then in the end, it boiled down to they decided that they would go with her, the one candidate. What we've got at the moment is quite a few people, including current ministers, on manoeuvres. Now that the vote is underway, anyway, it's in the public domain. People like Sajid Javid, the Home Secretary, is one of them. Looking at the bookies, who, by the way, 90% are 90% sure, as are a lot of the British media, if not sure, think and believe that this Prime Minister and this leader of the party will win this, but have some doubts about what happens next. We knew that Liam Fox, her current trade minister, actually on air today on British television, said that he supported her, he wanted her to win this, but she needed to be under no illusion that she needed to get rid of the backstop, or the cabinet basically would not have it, in other words, would make her go. One wonders if she wins, but not by a big enough majority, whether she, of her own volition, decides, well, actually, I'm going to go now. But she's just so resilient. She's been written off so many times. I will just also add one other thing. Guess what, Francois? Of all the days, tonight is the Conservative Party Christmas party. What an atmosphere there will be as we speak and after the vote.
Okay.
Will they be using party poppers? I don't know. Christmas crackers, possibly.
Right.
What will Santa say? I don't know. But anyway, I thought I would just add that local colour. Having not this time being besieged by protesters, it is a very divided country, a very divided party of Remainers and Brexiteers. What is their choice? Are they going to go for confidence in this Prime Minister
or
and
not?
This leader of the Conservative Party, or no confidence?
All right, and if there's any way to crash that Christmas party, I'm sure Bénédicte Paviot will find it. Many thanks for joining us live there outside of the Houses of Parliament. Now, as you were saying, this leadership challenge happening as we get into the money time on Brexit deliberations. We've been paying, as we were just saying earlier with Catherine Nicholson, a lot more attention to who holds power, the executive or the legislative branches. A reminder of the power bestowed on Parliament came Monday when Labour MP Lloyd Russell Moyle, that's his name, tried to make off with the ceremonial mace bestowed by the Queen on the House of Commons. He was kicked out of the Commons for the rest of the day. It was quite a sight, Robert Toombs. A lot of us who watch British affairs from afar didn't know about the ceremonial mace. But what does that tell you, though, about that struggle we're witnessing between the executive and the legislative branch of government where you are?
Well, it tells us that a lot of politicians have got very excited. I think the problem is that Parliament, the House of Commons, has been trying to take over part of the role of the executive, that's to say Mrs. May's role, partly because Mrs. May herself has been so, let's say, so difficult to fathom. What she's been doing, often in secret, without telling her colleagues, has naturally made many MPs feel that something has got to be done to get a grip of what is going on. But the problem is that Parliament cannot govern the country. Only ministers can govern the country. Parliament would normally dismiss a government that it didn't have confidence in, but Parliament, or at least the Conservative Party, is very reluctant to face an election. And there's no way at the moment that the House of Commons can effectively force an election, which would be a way out of this.
All right, you bring us to the question of whether or not Parliament can force the election, and that brings us to that. At the same time, brings us to the point where traditional fault lines have been upended. Here in France, we've seen it: left versus right, upended by what's been going on, and you get a sense of that. In London on Tuesday, there was a cross-party collection of lawmakers who gathered to call for a second referendum, a people's vote. They included Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dems, Greens, Welsh and Scottish nationalists. One of those Scottish nationalists, Ian Blackford, took aim at Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn for not calling now for a vote of no confidence and triggering that election. If Jeremy can't put himself in that position, then we, as the leaders of the other opposition parties, must rise to the challenge and we must put down that motion of no confidence. Mary Honeyball, are you with Are you with Ian Blackford on this one, or are you with Jeremy Corbyn on this one?
Well, I am, of course, a Labour MEP, and therefore I think Labour is by far the largest opposition party. Labour is Her Majesty's loyal opposition, and we need to understand that. The Scottish Nationalists and the other parties are very small, so the vote has to come from the Labour Party, and they are considering it. There's been a lot of issues around this about when to do it, and the party, I know, is still thinking about how and the best way forward. So it's not a question of if, it's a question of when, I think.
And for you personally, when is the right moment?
Well, I would agree with that. I think actually now that Theresa May's fate will be sealed one way or the other. I think that would now be the time to do it, because her particular trials and tribulations at the moment was the first stage in the process, and I think now we should probably follow it with the vote of confidence. Whether or not that is going to be before Christmas, I mean, I can't say. We may find that the House of Commons cancels Christmas. The way things are going, that looks a distinct possibility.
And as Robert Toombs says, when Cromwell did it, it was unpopular. But
we have moved on a bit from the 17th century.
So
only a little bit.
So what are the chances that Jeremy Corbyn will throw down that vote of no confidence, try and trigger a general election on a Thursday?
It's possible. I don't, unfortunately, have any magic insights into this. I think it is a possibility now. So what I would say to all of you journalists and to all the viewers, just keep watching this, because it may happen.
Because we heard during Parliament's question time, the Prime Minister batter Corbyn repeatedly, saying Corbyn doesn't care one way or the other about Brexit. All he cares about is power.
Well, I think that's very rich coming from Theresa May, who has shown an absolutely amazing capability to hang on to power. I mean, of course, political parties want to form a government. I mean, that's talked about the constitution earlier. That's the way that all countries' constitutions work. So I think it's really a bit much coming from Theresa May, who already has that power, if the opposition party should want it. And I know that the Labour Party, in many ways, will welcome a general election, because parties do. I mean, that's the lifeblood of politics. And I don't know whether May will go for it or not. Robert Toombs has already mentioned the Fixed Terms Parliament Act, which makes it much more difficult. It would have to be agreed by a 2/3 majority in the House of Commons. So it's a difficult thing to do. The Prime Minister can't just call a general election the way that they have done in the past.
So Robert Toombs, May could be in the driver's seat when we wake up on Thursday morning, because once you've had a leadership challenge inside of the Conservative Party, the in-house rules of the Tories are you have to wait another year before you can mount another one. You need that 2/3 majority. As Mary Honeyball was just mentioning, Theresa May could in fact have all the cards in her hand on Thursday.
Well, the rules play in her favour, that's true. I think it should be said that Labour has another problem too, which hasn't been mentioned yet by Mary, which is that they are just as divided about Brexit as the Conservatives. Jeremy Corbyn is a very staunch Brexiteer, because the left-wing policies he wants to carry out can only really be carried out outside the EU. But most of the Labour Party activists are pro-EU. Many of the Labour Party electors, especially in the north of England, are pro-Brexit. So Labour has had to very skillfully maintain an ambiguous position ever since the last election, when one ought not to forget its manifesto pledged it to support Brexit. So both parties are very divided. Both parties are risking breaking their pledges to the electorate. Both parties risk splitting over this. So there's a potential for a remaking of the whole political landscape.
Did you see this coming when we were together speaking the day after the vote back in 2016?
No, I don't. Well, I
Yes,
thought there was going to be some difficulties with this. I really didn't think it was going to be smooth. And what nobody in Britain started doing at that time and is only belatedly waking up to now is actually the EU side of things. As an MEP, I found it absolutely extraordinary that the whole thing was focused on Britain, on the Prime Minister, on the House of Commons, what the Prime Minister's plan was, what the opposition's plan was, and there was nothing actually about what was happening in the European Union, which of course is the other negotiator and actually rather larger than the UK. We now seem to be realising that the UK does have views about this, and there are certain things, mainly protection of the single market, that the EU will not. That the EU will go to the line on, because they absolutely want to maintain, rightly in my view, the integrity of the EU itself and of the single market. Britain seems to have suddenly, in the last few days, come to the table and began to understand that.
All right, which brings us to the subject of to what Theresa May has been doing this week. It hasn't just been in the UK. She cancelled a trip this Wednesday to Dublin in order to try to shore up support ahead of that leadership challenge. But some cruelly calling it May's desperation tour. Everyone picked up, by the way, on the trouble Theresa May had opening her car door as Angela Merkel waited for her in the rain in Berlin. This was on Tuesday, a day when May also visited the Netherlands and Brussels. And as Angela Merkel reported back to her own parliament this Wednesday, there she is, she got out of the car. There's no going back on the deal on offer, quite the contrary.
You must know from current news reporting that things are still underway. I can say to the people in Germany that we work hard for an orderly withdrawal, but parallel to it, we're preparing for a hard Brexit.
So Germany taking no chances, Catherine Nicholson.
Oh, that's right, and not just Germany by any means. In fact, Robert Toombs mentioned it earlier, France has made a lot of no-deal preparations. This has been ongoing for weeks, and on Monday, the Assemblée Nationale passed a bill that would allow the government to pass through all sorts of changes. I'm sure our viewers can imagine them for themselves. To keep the Eurostar trains running, that kind of thing.
No, more than that. I saw
much more than that.
It guarantees the jobs of some 10,700 UK citizens who are French civil servants.
Indeed, absolutely. I mean, I spoke to the French Europe minister myself, and she said these British citizens in France are very, very important to us. She also said, though, French citizens in the UK are very important to us. There is an idea of mirroring of rights. So if it does come to a no deal, then I think that the citizens have been quite right in saying that they're bargaining chips, because there would be a mirroring of rights. If the UK decides to be harsh on EU citizens, then...
Now, I noticed
that
May visits the Netherlands, Brussels, of course, Berlin. She was scheduled to visit Dublin. That makes sense with the whole Northern Ireland thing. How come she didn't come to Paris?
Well, how come she didn't come to Paris?
Is it because of the Yellow Vest movement, or is it because, well, Macron doesn't matter as much as Merkel?
It's a very good question, and actually did get a little bit of a briefing on that earlier from an official at the Élysée Palace. Apparently, yes, this wasn't a snub to Emmanuel Macron, according to the Élysée. This was because of a focus on the Gilets jaunes protests. Emmanuel Macron is expected to speak on the phone to Theresa May before the summit happening tomorrow, or starting tomorrow, in fact.
Because Europe's in flux, the UK is in flux. What did you make, Robert Toombs, of that tour that we saw on Tuesday by the UK Prime Minister?
Well, the only chance of her salvaging something of her policy, which is encapsulated in the withdrawal agreement, is to get some sort of change, which could be presented to the British Parliament and the British people as a significant change, whereas it could be dismissed by European governments and the EU as not a significant change. So some sort of reassurance or clarification, as I think Jean-Claude Juncker called it, which would try to reassure the people of Britain that this deal would not go on forever. But as I said earlier, legally, there is no legal way out of the United Kingdom unless the EU agrees. So there'd have to be some sort of fairly strong statement which would be legally enforceable, saying the EU does not intend to continue this arrangement beyond a certain point, or something of that kind.
Well, just to pick up on that, Robert Toombs, it's Catherine Nicholson here. That's indeed the message we've heard from Jean-Claude Juncker. It is also what I heard from sources at the Elysee, that France, along with the other EU 27, willing to clarify and reassure, those are the exact words that were used, certain political points. But the EU will not be backing down from the need for a backstop solution to prevent a hard border on the island of Ireland. That is the same message we've heard all along, and we are hearing the same message from all of the EU 27 still at this point.
All right. I want to thank you, Catherine Nicholson. I want to thank so much Labour MEP Mary Honeyball for joining us from Strasbourg. Robert Toombs in Cambridge. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to James Creedon. I know you're starting with the Daily Mail.
Yes.
They used to have a very pro-Brexit editor, and they've changed editors. I've noticed that it's not quite as hard line when it comes to the EU as before.
Well, I think, as certain commentators have been saying today, if you kind of come back down to earth and away from theories of how things could in a fantastical universe work out, Theresa May seems to be sort of doing her best to pull things together. Yet the vultures are circling. It was more that headline that I was going for, which actually was an image that I also saw elsewhere. No confidence vote to be held tonight. So just about the leadership battle. If she wins, she can't be voted out by her own party for 12 months. The vultures are circling. We won't name the vultures, but certainly they're being mentioned. I noticed a couple of headlines about how she's limping on. Now, she's not limping, but this metaphor has been used. This is a headline actually going back to June 2017. And as I actually just put it into Twitter and realised that she's been limping basically for 2 years. That was her limping in
dancing, James.
Right, exactly. There you go. She limped, danced, then limped for some more, then got stuck in her car. That was the image that seemed to sum up her difficulties. This was yesterday in Brussels. Well, it was in Berlin when she was about to meet Angela Merkel. She seems to have been very unlucky with the sort of images that accompany her diplomatic quest for closing the deal. There you go. I mean, that's really unfortunate.
And yet the bookmakers say, she'll still be Prime Minister of England come Thursday morning.
I mean, it seems to be a strategy that is actually kind of working to sort of assume this weakened role, but to kind of keep going forward. That image, I'm sorry to share it. It was actually one of her colleagues shared it yesterday. It's obviously not a real image, and it's an old image, but this was her sort of going between various European capitals, trying desperately to see if some concession could be reached. So it's easy to mock her, it's easy to see her as a figure of fun, but it requires a huge amount of skill, I think, to get this far in such, when she is between a rock and a hard place. Now, just to kind of get to the grist of matters, this is the Telegraph. We want to help, we just don't know how. The EU reacts to Theresa May's no confidence vote, and basically it's coming back down to the backstop and the simple facts that you need any EU country can veto the backstop being kind of questioned. Ireland in particular at the front line concerned by that, they can just veto it at any time. So even if there was a very good thread that Catherine, you shared it earlier, and it helped to elucidate matters for me. Peter Foster of the Telegraph, sorry to intrude on today's drama, he's saying, in other words, let's get back down to earth here, and he goes through in point by point all of the ways in which the different scenarios, the utopian scenarios for the hard Brexiters, simply aren't really based in reality, chiefly being that the EU stands as a bloc on this, and even if they were to be able to negotiate, as he puts it, throwing Leo Varadkar, the Irish Taoiseach Prime Minister, under a bus, there would be a general election, and it would just be a restatement of the same thing coming out of that. And so there's almost no way to avoid this. What else do I have? I'll just finish with a tweet by David Cameron.
David Cameron, remember him?
The guy who called the referendum in the first place, and a lot of people still haven't forgotten that. I hope Conservative MPs will back the Prime Minister in the vote today. We need no distractions from seeking the best outcome with our neighbours, friends and partners in the EU. The comments are rather grisly. He's been called treasonous and a tosspot and being told shame on you.
So don't scroll too far, James. There's some rude
all right,
ones.
I'll leave it at that.
There's some very rude ones.
I think I've already said some rude words, but there's even worse. So there does seem to be he's still being kind of seen as the person responsible for this mess.
Do you feel like the blowback against Cameron is as strong as the blowback against Tony Blair over the
Not at all. No. David Cameron has disappeared from the scene. He was found the other day getting into a car. Somebody said to him, "Do you regret the referendum?" He said no and went. There's not been any blowback on David Cameron, I don't think.
Okay.
He's keeping a low profile.
Yeah.
Keeping a low profile. All right, I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here, and we'll have coverage of the result of that leadership challenge against Theresa May coming up with Laura Cellier. You're watching France 24.